a 5th entry in a franchise that's made over $3 billion, and what seems to be the bright spot of the dystopian teen survival genre, Hunger Games Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes brings us back to Panem, but this time following Lucy Gray in the 10th annual Hunger Games. The book for this movie was released in 2020, and the film was even considered to be split up into 2 different parts, but the final film we have is one movie coming in at a whopping 2 hours and 45 minutes, the longest of the series. This, along with the director of the last 3 films returning, and a new cast that spans from Rachel Zegler to Viola Davis, there's a plethora of reasons I was excited for this movie, and I'm happy to say that this is basically exactly what I wanted. Before I get into more of my thoughts on Hunger Games and the Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes, let me know what you guys thought of this movie in the comments down below, and subscribe so you don't miss my ranking of the entire Hunger Games franchise coming later this weekend. And this video won't be containing any spoilers. I know that there is a book out, but I personally haven't read it, so I'm going to give you guys all of my spoiler-free thoughts, and I want to start off by talking about the cast of this film because they are all absolutely incredible. From Tom Blythe to Rachel Zegler, Hunter Schafer, Peter Dinklage, Viola Davis, and Jason Schwartzman, every single performance in this movie is absolutely top-notch. But the one that tops it all for me, the scene stealer, the showstopper for me, has to be Tom Blythe as President Snow. I'm not going to lie, I'm going to talk about the story in more detail in just a second here, but I went into this movie thinking that Lucy Gray was going to be the main character, the character at the forefront of literally everything, but that's not what this movie is. And again, I didn't read the novel, so I didn't really know anything going in, but President Snow is basically having a character study done on him throughout the entirety of this film. Obviously, there's the games, and he's not the one participating in the games. He's the mentor to Lucy Gray, but he doesn't really do anything else other than just be at the forefront.
Lucy Gray won't survive a minute inside that arena. So that means we have to make every second before then count. I'll get her to sing again.
His character is the one that's impacted by all of these things. Obviously, Lucy Gray is fighting for her life. All the other tributes are fighting for their lives. But all of the story impact goes back to President Snow, which I found absolutely thrilling. Hunter Schafer is also in this movie, a lot less than I expected, but that's not a bad thing. I think she did a pretty good job for the time that she had. She plays President Snow's cousin, I think, and she does a great job. I did quickly want to mention Josh Andres Rivera. He is absolutely amazing in this movie. I did not expect much from him at all. He's barely marketed, but plays such a key role in the thematic elements of this film. He is such an emotional core to the themes, and he just goes so underrated, and he kind of gets buried under all of these performances, but he is definitely a highlight of the movie, and he was the emotional core of the rebellion aspect of this film. Rachel Zegler is obviously great. They had no doubts going into this. She has a lot of musical elements in this movie that I'll talk about later in this video, but for what she does, she gives a lot of great emotion. She has a little bit of a Western accent in this movie, which also really worked for me, and she is just a very passion-driven character, and that works well. Peter Dinklage is obviously amazing. He plays a great, more of an anti-character to President Snow, which I really enjoyed, but one of the other biggest standouts for me was Viola Davis. She is phenomenal in every single project that she's in, and this is no different. She plays more of the original game maker, and she is absolutely menacing. She is thrilling every time she's on screen, and her and Tom Blythe have this perfectly raw and visceral energy, because obviously we know President Snow becomes the game maker in the future of Panem, and so you see that mentor-mentee dynamic starting to evolve here, and it just works perfectly between the two actors and actresses.
I've broken free of my laboratory today to examine you, the leaders of the next generation.
And Jason Schwartzman is obviously hilarious. He plays the host of the Hunger Games, and he's great. But I want to move more into the story because, like I said, this is more of a Snow origin story than it is just a story about the games, and that's because of the way that they structure this movie. It's a very specific 3-act structure, and I personally really like it. The first act is more of Snow's origin and kind of his reasoning. He's in this school, and the reason that he's gonna be involved in the games is because he wants to get a scholarship to go to college. The student that'll get the scholarship is the one that's the best mentor for one of the tributes in the game, and they're doing this in order to make the games more interesting and add more stakes. He ends up getting on Viola Davis's character's good side because he has a lot of great changes that he wants to make to the game, and I think that this storyline works perfectly. It throws us directly into all of the action because when you're looking at the mentor, you feel like you're directly in the games, and that's exactly what happens here. And then the second act of the entire movie is the Hunger Games themselves, and this movie is long. I'm gonna talk about the runtime in just a second here, but it is very long, and between the second and third acts, you really do feel that just because there is a lot going on. You'd think that the ending of the games is the ending of the movie, but that's not really how it works. There's a lot of twists and turns and a lot of stuff that transpires within the evolution of the game itself that takes you into that third act, and I personally absolutely love the way that they evolve the story. And then going into the third act, it's more about Snow and Lucy Gray's future, and Snow's future with Lucy Gray, where he kind of ends up after the games, the twist that happens, where that leads him. And this is kind of where I've seen a lot of people say that they want to split this movie up into 2 different parts, and I would initially agree with that because the final act does feel a little bit rushed, but kind of getting into the runtime here, the movie is 2 hours and 45 minutes. It's the longest of the series by a little chunk, and it could have been split up into 2 movies. The director even said that he was considering it, but I feel like maybe one movie was the best move just because the final act of this movie doesn't really have enough meat to just be put into a single movie itself, and it does feel like it'd be the problem that the last 2 movies had, where one of the movies kind of feels pointless and then the other one is pretty good. And so I think that they kind of had a hard thing to do here. They had a hard decision to make, and at the end of the day, I think making one movie was probably the right decision. I think that the ending of this movie is just interesting enough to where they can justify it to be one bigger movie. I think runtime-wise, the fact that this movie is so big and grand as well gives everything that proper sense of scope and scale, and they do a great job of making it thematically rich enough to where it's still always captivating you. Again, the beginning is very much in terms of Snow's origin, and then you get to the entertaining games part, what everyone is there for, and then you get a conclusion that's more focused on the individual character elements of it. So I like the balance between all of the different acts. But kind of straying away from the story side of things, I think visually this movie is so distinct compared to the original 4 films. It's a lot of that warm versus cold like they do in the first movies, but there's a lot of more modernized camera movements, and that's what I think makes this very chunky runtime flow so well. The director just absolutely modernizes the action. It's not just close-up stills like the first 4 movies were. It's a lot of dynamic action and wide angles. There's this one sequence where Tom Blythe has a very emotional recollection of a moment, and it's not just a standstill camera, it's a wide angle that gets close to his eyes, his face. It moves with the emotion, and it makes everything flow that much better. It feels like everything is constantly flowing, and I think that works because in regards to the action, this movie isn't a raw action movie like Catching Fire is, for example. That movie is you're just dropped in an arena and you're fighting for your life. Only the second act of this movie is the tributes fighting for their lives, and so for the rest of the film, you have to live up to that bar of entertainment, and in terms of bringing you a character study, they do a great job of balancing all of the action, the gunfights, the hand-to-hand combat, with all of the smaller character moments, where Tom Blythe's character, President Snow, is feeling this real emotional connection to other characters like Lucy Gray. As a whole, Hunger Games Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes is an amazing entry into the Hunger Games franchise. It doesn't just feel like they wanted to throw out a sequel. It feels like a story that really did need to be told within this world. And as a fan of the franchise, I really enjoyed this movie. Overall, I'm going to give Hunger Games and the Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes an 8.5 out of 10. Again, let me know what you guys thought of this movie in the comments down below, and subscribe so you don't miss my ranking of the entire Hunger Games franchise coming to the channel later this weekend. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.